call the civil, oh, I'm sorry. Let me talk to, do I need to start that over? We're good. Okay. I'm going to call the Civil Law and Data Practices Committee to order, and we will wait till we have a quorum to approve the minutes from last time. What I'd like to do today is, since we're just hearing both bills and laying them over, I'll present House File 155 and take testifiers, and then Representative Cornish will present his bill 222 and hear from his testifiers, and then we will open it up to members for questions. So I'm just going to present House File 155 from my chair here, and then we'll take testifiers on that. I chose to go first because I think my bill will take less time to cover. It's a one-pager. It calls for zero retention and classifies as private or non-public the data unless there is a hit. Identifies a vehicle or license plate that has been stolen, or there's a warrant out for the owner's arrest, or the owner has a suspended or revoked driver's license. Or if the data are active or investigative data, in those cases it would be held longer than zero. Any law enforcement agency that installs or uses an LPR must maintain a log of its use, including locations where the reader is installed or used, specific times of day the reader was collecting data, the aggregate number of vehicles or LPRs on which data are collected for each period of active use, and the log data is public, classified as public. My bill says that there would be a biennial audit of data collected from LPRs to determine A, whether the data has been classified or destroyed as required, and B, specific data used in the audit shall be classified as private or non-public. Also specifies that a law enforcement agency may not use an LPR unless the agency has implemented policies and procedures necessary to ensure compliance. And what this comes down to, really, members, I believe, is a philosophy on mass surveillance. And there's about 3 different philosophies you could take on. Some folks would say that there should be no mass surveillance at all on innocent citizens or those not suspected of a crime without cause. Or there's the belief that there is some utility to mass surveillance to help catch the quote-unquote bad guys that are known to have committed a crime. Or 3, there's the philosophy that government should collect and keep all data indiscriminately on innocent people without cause, just in case we might catch a bad guy or solve a future crime. I happen to fall with that middle one. I think there is some utility for mass surveillance to help catch the bad guys by people that have been known to commit a crime. I think there are several things that we have to watch for in the future. If we do hold data at all at any time, and that's that the capabilities of LPRs can be expanded. They have high-resolution cameras, and with the prospect of facial recognition on the scene, that is something that we would really have to keep a watchful eye on. And really it comes down to a matter of, do you think that we have a presumption that our daily activities and movements are private or public? And so with that, I'd like to, do we have a list of testifiers for 155, or do we just want to open it up? Open it up. Okay. Representative, Mr. Gibberling, would you like to come forward and testify? Please introduce yourself for the tape.
Will do. Yeah, Madam Chair, my name is Don Gemberling. I'm with the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information. We're the people who try and support government accountability by supporting access to information, particularly more transparency. Okay. COGI is a collection of all volunteers, lawyers, media people, librarians, private citizens, and I think that kind of covers the gamut. So, but we have some freelance people too. We've been following the legislation on license plate readers for quite a while, and where we see concern, and it's a generalized concern as it relates to surveillance technology, is that as we continue to live in and go deeper into a surveillance society, which has been the case now for several years, where we've gotten to is essentially to say that you have to accept as a given that that's going to be the way things are. We may not like that as individuals, but it's kind of the way things are. So how do you kind of compensate for the potential problems with surveillance technology, including invasion of privacy and attacks on autonomy and that kind of thing? And we think the way to do that is, particularly where the government is involved, to as often and as much as possible put transparency into the mix. And what we mean by transparency is maximize the amount of information and the kinds of information that the public is able to access that tells them how technology is being used and potentially how it's being abused. So, as some of you know, currently, especially the FBI, is spending a lot of time and a lot of effort going around the country trying to convince local law enforcement agencies to not talk about certain kinds of technologies in any way. The one that comes to mind most often is the Stingray stuff. That's a type of technology that is able to get access to information about cell phone usage and locations of cell phones. And I've been around long enough to understand a little bit about how the FBI does things. And at one point in my life, I actually worked with the FBI. I didn't work for them. I worked with them because I was working on criminal justice information systems. And the idea that the federal government would come to a local police department and tell them, you can't talk about things like Stingray, I find very troubling, okay? Because what that supports then is the whole idea that we really can't find out what our government is doing. And I think historically we all know that has not been a really good idea, okay? So in these bills, our general thought is as much transparency as you can put into the bill, the better off we'll all be, okay? So for example, where you have information about how ALPRs are used, that should include where they're being used, that sort of thing, okay? You're going to consider another bill, Representative Cornish's bill. You know, that has a report required from each government agency in Minnesota on how it's using surveillance technology of all types. And that's, I think, a really good idea. So wherever possible to bring light, as it were, to the discussion, we think the better off we'll all be. So more information required by the government to make public how it's using things. I realize there's some issues there, but things like audits, that sort of thing, especially frequent audits. One of as of yesterday, the Senate bill now has triennial audits, which I think is not often enough. I mean, it's just like, that's a long period of time. So, and I'm sure you're going to hear from Mr. Neumeister a little bit about the history of LPR use in Minnesota, including the ability of the READ data to track, among other people, Mayor Ryback's movements over a long period of time. Actually, I think over a matter of days. He was real busy and moving around the city of Minneapolis, which is what you'd expect from the mayor. So our message, essentially, to summarize, is whatever you can do to make the information public, and I understand you're going to have to balance the considerations of active investigative data, that kind of thing, the better off we'll be. One more example. In the discussions about how license plate readers are used, there's reference to the fact that they go to other databases. That's their whole purpose. In and of themselves, they're not a retention device. They're essentially replacing a law enforcement officer standing on the corner, writing down a license number, and accessing information based on that license plate number. But I keep hearing that they're used to find stolen cars, to find people for whom there are warrants out, that sort of thing. But I think you really need to hear somewhere in the testimony and understand very clearly just exactly what databases license plate readers access. Because without knowing that, you can't really understand the full extent of whether or not they really are being used as tracking devices, and there's some disagreement about that, and exactly who they're looking at, okay? I'll give you one kind of strange example. Several years ago, a person was at a demonstration at a congressman's office. I think it was in Burnsville. And it was a demonstration, I think, in support of Second Amendment rights. And at some point, he went to his car and opened the trunk. And he got something out of the trunk, and he went back to the demonstration. Well, that demonstration was being observed by law enforcement. And they saw that he'd gone to his trunk. They wondered maybe if he'd gotten a weapon, possible. So they ran his license plate number the way things are done, it used to be done, which is just, officer went to a terminal and checked the license plate number. Well, it turned out that that particular system could access information, among other things, about gun ownership. Some of you remember you passed a law a while ago that says there can't be a statewide database about gun ownership, okay? And so that led the officers then to confront the guy and essentially ask him what he was doing and what he went to his trunk for. Well, I think he went to his trunk and got a bottle of water or something. He certainly didn't get a gun. Well, that then led to a whole discussion about what in essence was a database that most people didn't know about, the Multi-Jurisdiction Network Organization. And Representative Holberg really kind of went after that organization in a way, and they eventually ended up disbanding the whole organization. Okay? Those are the kind of things I think you need hopefully to understand in finding out just exactly what license plate readers, what databases do they really access, okay? And that will help you decide, I think, whether or not their usage and how you limit their usage or not limit their usage ought to be controlled. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gimberling, so you're advocating that as much as possible should be public, and I'm trying to get a sense of timing of that. So do you believe that it should be public prior to putting the reader on the corner so anybody can find out where it's going to be, or after, immediately after, or within a few days after they're done collecting? When, for timing purposes, do you believe that the public should have access to that information?
Mr. Gimberling.
Madam Chair, Representative Hillstrom, I think if the data exists, as in a plan that we're going to put this on that corner, I think maximum transparency says that ought to be public. Okay. One of the kind of lurking issues out here is these devices have a physical presence. They look like something. Okay. I saw the first ones a few months ago in St. Paul, in part because I'd become consciousness raised. You know, there are two boxes that sit on the back on the trunk of the squad car. What I'm concerned about is, you know, one of the provisions in one of the bills somewhere is to give the ability of law enforcement to decide that security information, which under the Data Practices Act is not public. Well, in my mind, when I think about these things, I go, well, that must mean we're now going to go to license plate readers that you can somehow camouflage, you know, make them look like a fire hydrant, I don't know. And that then I think we're really then in stranger ground, because now we not only have surveillance technology, but we don't even have the ability to say, it's there. So, you know, another example, photocop. Part of the reason for photocop, which we don't use anymore, thanks to some cases, you know, part of the reason for photocop is you got to know that driving down the street, that box in the corner was going to record your speed, and therefore you quit speeding. So whenever the surveillance stuff becomes super secret, then we're troubled by the public not being able to know how to react to that, okay? So.
Madam Chair.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then a follow-up question to that. Once the data is collected, how much of that information should be public? As previously, it all became public, and you could track, for example, Mayor Rybeck's whereabouts. How much of the information that is collected do you believe should be public?
Mr. Kimberly.
Madam Chair, Representative Hillstrom, when this discussion started last session, we talked about that. I have a board, and we decided that there's so many issues associated with that the real simple way to deal with this is to say that except for hits, the data should be destroyed, and then you don't get into those issues in a minimum period of time. We supported at that time 0 days.
Madam Chair.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the event this legislature doesn't end on 0 days, there's 2 different bills with 2 different times, and they have a time frame under which data is going to be destroyed. What about the data that they are maintaining for that period of time? How public do you believe that data should be, both to people outside of law enforcement or inside of law enforcement? How frequently should it be allowed to be searched? What should the requirements be for access to that, either by the public or by the entity that holds the data?
Mr. Kimberly.
Madam Chair, Representative Hillstrom, we fully understand that which produces a hit hopefully is going to be related to active investigations. And probably under the existing Data Practices Act, they could treat that data as not public under that provision, okay? Because, the criminal investigative data definition is pretty broad. It means data collected or created in anticipation, data collated or collected for the purpose of bringing a case against a person known or unknown, okay? So hits that aren't going to be public anyway, okay? The non-hits, we had a long discussion about that on the board. The openness at any cost, people wanted it all to be public, and we thought practically, politically, small p, that's not a sell, so we support it being not public-private. So.
And I just wanted to add to folks that this body set up a commission last legislative session, the Commission on Data Practices, made up of legislators bipartisanly and bicamerally, and to study these particular issues. And the opinion of that commission was to have 0 retention. So I just wanted to add that comment too. Any other brief questions for Mr. Gimberling? Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gemberling, you had stated in your comments that based upon the history of surveillance and government action, I think we're all pretty aware of the situations that made it problematic. I don't think we are. I don't think that the committee is, and I don't think the legislature is in general. Can you describe what you're talking about, instances of what we need to worry about repeating as government entities and agencies in a direction that maybe we don't want to go?
Mr. Gimberling.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, I sometimes am rebuked because my background is that of a history person, and I know too much history, and I tend sometimes to go overboard, so I'll just talk for a while until I could see looks on your faces like, is this guy ever going to show up? Government surveillance has been a reality in this country for a very long time, okay? I'll give you some examples. In the late 19th century, and particularly into the early 20th century, within a lot of police departments, particularly large ones, there were units of those police departments that were called red squads, okay? Their purpose was to keep an eye on left-wingers, particularly communists. Well, as the history of red squads has emerged, what we've learned is that a lot of people in power decided that if you were a labor union member, you must be a communist. okay? Now, that one is dear to my heart because my dad was the financial secretary of his union, okay? And frankly, when I was a kid, I spent more time in union halls than I usually spent on the playground because my parents both worked in the union hall. So that's one example that goes way back. Some of you, if you're into Minnesota history, know about the Minnesota Commission of Public Safety. Can I do a poll? How many of you have heard of that?
No poll.
Okay, that figures. So, the Minnesota Commission on Public Safety was created during right after we entered World War I, and it was some pretty powerful people, including, I think, the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. Its job was to keep an eye on all aliens, particularly Germans, okay? And again, that one is fond to my heart because I'm mostly German. My mother was an immigrant, and you know, they collected dossiers on every person who was an alien living in Minnesota. And it wasn't just Germans, it was also Irish and Swedes and Norwegians. And I watched a wonderful presentation about that at the History Society about a year ago. Okay? One of the things that happened, particularly in, you know, I'll bring you up to like the 60s, was there was tons and tons of surveillance of the anti-war movement. Okay? And frankly, I was a participant in that movement. I saw it personally. It took the form usually of cameras photographing people, conducting First Amendment activities. Increasingly, it involved agents of law enforcement infiltrating legitimate groups, and also infiltrating groups that were not, shall we say, not so legitimate, like the Weatherman faction of the Students for a Democratic Society. So, you know, surveillance in this country has a long history. What's changed is how much we're able to surveil these days because we have the technology available to do it, okay? I've been doing some presentations lately through the Great Decisions program of the Foreign Policy Association, and I use a handout that's essentially just a collection of like 30 different surveillance technologies, and I have to update it about every 2 months because somebody comes up with a new one, okay? So, you know, and some of you, again, have heard this before. At some point, and I hope the Privacy Commission continues, you really need to start thinking in real broad terms in what I think of as what kind of society we want to live in. There's now people, and I love American ingenuity. Actually, it's everybody's ingenuity. There are people that are now working on machines that will, and they perfected them to some extent, that can look at your face, calculate how your face works, run it through computer algorithms, and the computer will be able to tell somebody how you feel. I mean that literally, okay? And who do you think really wants to buy technology like that? People trying to sell stuff to us, okay? So, you know, you may not find that disturbing, but I really do. Okay. See, I can hide behind a beard, sort of. So, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is move to our next testifier, and then ask folks to stick around. Oh, wait, Mr. Gimberling, just a second. Representative Gruenhagen has a question.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Very quickly, you know, I appreciate your testimony, experience, and background, and on these issues. And I don't want to be surveyed either. And you know, if I'm obeying the law and behaving myself, which, but anyway, you know, we had testimony from the law enforcement initially on this surveillance issue, which showed that an individual is driving down the roads in the metro area and throwing things out in front of other cars. And if memory serves me on that testimony, they solved that problem with license plate reader, and I think it was after 90 days. I'm not 100% sure on that. But how would this bill affect law enforcement's ability to find somebody like that? Because in the end, he was throwing huge things out in front of cars going the other way, obviously endangering people's lives and public safety. Do you have any quick thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, Representative Gruenhagen, I think the number is 67 days, but Chief Potts is here, and he can tell us for sure. Part of what I learned in testimony yesterday, I kept trying to connect the dots as to how the technology got the guy. Well, it turned out it was the technology plus some good police work, okay? The dilemma is everybody who drove down Normandale Boulevard, which is where they installed the ALPRs, everybody, including the vast majority of people who weren't doing anything wrong, got surveilled, okay? And the problem there potentially, and I try and think out a little ways, the problem there potentially is if we expand on the capability of the technology, and right now there's technology out there that's not just license plate readers, it also looks at the driver and then uses facial recognition software. And, you know, one of the things I learned about these systems, and I used to work on these systems. That was my first job at the state of Minnesota, was criminal justice information systems. One of the things I've learned, and it's captured in the very cliche phrase, if you build it, they will come, okay? So I was thinking this morning, will at some point, will we use license plate reader technology to find people who do not pay child support, okay? You know? We have a strong societal thing about people paying child support. Under federal law, people who enforce child support laws can essentially look at any database that exists, except for some of the secret stuff with the federal government, and strangely enough, except for employees of the CIA. You know, is that where we're going to go with this stuff potentially because of the capability of the technology? So.
Thank you, Mr. Gimberling. We are going to call the meeting to order. Representative Smith will move the minutes from our last meeting. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Other testifiers in regard to House File 155. Mr. Neumeister, please.
Madam Chair, for the record, my name is Rich Neumeister. I'm going to talk very briefly because I'm going to talk in detail about Representative Cornish's bill. I support your bill. As you so instantly stated, a non-hits. It was, after detailed hearings, supported by the Commission on Data Practices and Data Privacy. I think, and also another reason why there should be non-hit data is by far the largest percentage of LPR data collected, reads. If you take a look at any of the data that's out there, whether it be the Mall of America, which is right around 0.5%, 99.5% over a 3-month period that KSTB did. Another one is, you know, in 2011, Minneapolis Police Department LPR devices collected 3,750,877, and only 25,000 approximately were hits. The other important thing as a matter of principle is that keeping non-hit data presumes that everyone is guilty and turns the presumption of innocence on its head. Another approach is that government power is to approach government powers to limit that power to a degree necessary to achieve common aims as public safety. Keeping non-hit data on everyone vests too much power in government, more than it needs to provide public safety. And also, I just share with you a very similar thing like with the NSA. I think they're very analogous. Let me just be very specific about the bill. Now, there's going to be some comparisons in the bill, and I will make some of those comments in the other one. But I think it's very important that what 155 does with the definition on lines 110 and 111 deals with government data. All data derived from an automated reader that captures motor vehicle license plates. So that's broad enough to include the technology that changes. So if they put if it's integrated with facial recognition systems. If, as I indicated in the packet of information I gave to you all last week, they're looking at detection, or they're looking at speeds. The technology is evolving. So you want a flexible language so you don't have to come back every time that it changes. Secondly, If you look at lines 114 through 117, it's very specific, and it talks about only using the Minnesota license plate data file, which is very direct. You have, again, in the packet that was given to you, it's very detailed, the kinds of information that is in that database, rather than have locals. And Madam Chair, as Representative Johnson indicated in comments a couple of weeks ago, where he went on his ride-along, how easy it would be for locals. Well, I want to put maybe someone identified by a license plate, and then maybe even as data has shown that even locals have their own little databases, depending on who. Do they want to look at the protesters that are protesting at Occupy Minnesota, or that are protesting against the abortion clinic, or whatever it might be. Locals historically, and this has been happening across the country, the same kind of behavior more than likely may or is probably happening here. And the other thing, if you look at 120, which I like about this bill also, is that it has the zero retention, but it also has on 120 locations at which the reader is installed or used is public. And I think that's very important. What some of the beginning data is beginning to show across the country in Boston and in Oakland, where people have been able to get access to the whole data files, which we can't, which you were able to do before the temporary classification, that the LPRs are starting to be focused on low-income neighborhoods, communities of color, and these are raising some equality issues. And I think that's very important. I've looked at general with some people, with some of the data that was collected from Minneapolis, because there were some people that asked for all the 3 million scans. When I looked at it, from my perspective, I could say that maybe some of the fixed or stationary cameras, which are cars, and sometimes will park for a while or whatever, may be focused in those communities. And this is why I'm trying to get more information from some of the people that I know that collected that huge pile of data before it was closed off in 2012. So, Madam Chair, those are my comments about your bill, and I'll reserve the comments very specifically with the delete everything amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newmeister. Before I go to members' questions, I have not moved this bill before the committee, so I'd like to move House File 155 before the committee. Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Newmeister, I know you're not a lawyer, but I'm wondering what you're alleging regarding the groups of folks on whom data is collected in, say, low-income neighborhoods. Are you alleging that there may be some kind of equal protection claim that similarly situated people are treated differently? And that is could this potentially be a constitutional issue? Because I haven't heard that argument before.
Mr. Newmeister.
Madam Chair, Representative Latz, or
Lesch.
I dealt with Latz too when he was representative, but Representative Lesch, I'm sorry. I think there has been documented discriminatory behavior by law enforcement in its actions, in what it does across the country. I mean, that's a fact. And with using technology, I think claims might be. I mean, one does not know until the data is there. It'd be interesting. Again, that's how they use the data. Madam Chair, Representative Lesch, again, in the packet of information that I gave you last go-around, you'll see how, particularly when Vigilant Solutions talks about how you can use the data to focus on people, associations. There have been alleged by folks in even our own community with some of the databases, like the GangNet database, used in a discriminatory way when it came about and became knowledgeable 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm not the lawyer, but again, on the basis of my understanding, which is a good understanding, there could be issues of discriminatory disparities, which do get into constitutionality of aspects of equity of how you do things with the power of government. So that's as best as I can explain from my perspective.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I guess
Black.
I appreciate the answer to the question. My interest was piqued by his comments. You can't say that these devices are used well, I mean, I guess you could prove a device is used in a discrete instance to affect discriminatory conduct or something, but these are machines that are objective. They either collect the license plate that's in front of you or they don't. So you can't say that the police, by their actions, are being discriminatory in employing them. But I think the proper constitutional analysis is one of disparate impact, which would be relevant to this community. But I thank you for answering the question, Mr. Neumeister.
Representative Johnson.
Madam Chair, Representative Neumeister, or sorry about that, Mr. Neumeister. One of the, you piqued my interest when you talked about the issues in the other states in the minority areas where these were placed. I have a feeling that you may have inadvertently left out one comment of that. Those are also very high crime areas as well. So I think, for me personally, if it's a high crime area, I think it's an area that law enforcement needs to look at to reduce the crime rate. Do you agree with that?
Mr. Neumeister.
Madam Chair, Representative Johnson, it's also, I've been called senator and representative historically over the years, so I take it very much as a compliment, sometimes because of the details, and it's always a compliment, and I thank you for that inadvertent, but it shows that I have an interest, and I try to do the best I can as a citizen on these matters. Yes, there are high crimes, but at the same time, I do believe that there's a lot of innocent people in a lot of other areas, in those areas, but also there can be crime in just as much as in other areas. I mean, I don't know, I want to, I do think, though, that it raises some issues, but I think that's important, that if it's being oversaturated and they're not going to other areas. To me, again, that's the issue of, that I look at, whatever you want to call equity. I looked at all areas being treated the same, and if there's indicators. But, some are high crime areas, some are not. And some, like, for example, at least we all know that there's on the Plymouth Avenue fixed bridge, or one of the bridges there. I don't see anywhere else a fixed part in other parts of Minneapolis, at least with the public knowledge that we have of fixed cameras.
Representative Johnson.
Madam Chair, Mr. Neumeister, over the last few years, there's been a big push to get law enforcement to be proactive instead of reactive. Law enforcement's technically, through its entire career and in the profession, we've always reacted to crime. And over the last probably 2 decades, there's been a real push to be proactive to reduce crime. And the tough part about being proactive to reduce crime, would you agree, is it is intelligence, so we know, so we can stop the crime before it's happening, and the only way to do that is with intelligence. Would you agree with that?
Mr. Neumeister.
Or I should say a big part of that is intelligence.
Madam Chair, Representative Johnson, that has been an issue, just the issue of intelligence gathering. It's been an issue at the legislature for the last 6 years, and it will still be an issue. But the point that I will say to you is that, Madam Chair, Representative Johnson, is how, without getting into the details of all that stuff, there is a broad definition of what you call active criminal investigation. It may fit, it may not be. But secondly, which is the more important thing, that law enforcement comes up with all these new technologies and new toys without the public ever knowing about it. And then all of a sudden, they're in the 3rd year of doing it, the 4th year of doing it, And then they expect policymakers then to come back and sort of say. So things can work out if policymakers are informed and the public is informed in these new techniques of gathering information, of new technology, where it does not take a Rich Neumeister to do data requests and find out a lot about the Stingray, the predictive policing that's going on in Rochester, the issue of how LPRs are being used, and there are several other things that I'm aware of that's happening that even you as policymakers don't know, based on my data requests, that law enforcement is now doing or thinking of doing, or you see it in little memos or whatever. So that goes to that main point of if they share with you, the policymakers and the public, then we can all engage so that we don't have to play catch up. When I say we the people of Minnesota and you as policymakers.
Representative Johnson.
Madam Chair, Mr. Neumeister, as far as the technology for law enforcement, I agree with you 100% that the legislature needs to know about it. The tough part for law enforcement is we're usually 5 steps behind the people we're trying to catch. And if the people we're trying to catch know the tools law enforcement has, we're going to be 10 steps behind them. But I know it's here especially the legislature, to know what type of policies need to be put forward, it has to be public. So it's a real complicated situation that law enforcement has, trying to catch the bad guys and still protect you without letting the bad guys know how we're going to catch them. So it's a real complicated issue that we have to deal with.
Thank you, and that's why we're here this morning, folks. Next testifier is Professor Joseph Olson. Members, we have about an hour left, so I'd like to go through these witnesses, testifiers rather quickly, and then we can also come back to questions later, too.
Is our clerk?
A page. Where did our page go? Oh, there he goes. Welcome to the committee. Go ahead and state your name for the tape,
Thank
please.
you very much, Madam Chairman. I'm Joseph Olson. I'm a emeritus professor at Hamlin University School of Law. I'm not here on their behalf. I'm also the chairman of the Gun Owners Civil Rights Alliance, and I am here on their behalf. New technology is always something that the legislature needs to understand. It's something that people need to understand. And I learned something when I was in the military, that you don't worry about comments of intention as to how we're going to use something beneficially or not. You look at what's the data or whatever you're dealing with is capable of being used at. And in the PowerPoint presentation that you'll see later, you will see comments that, well, these aren't tracking devices. Well, no, they're not at the moment. That's a programming problem. They're not networked across jurisdictions. No, they're not at the moment. That's a programming problem as well. They don't capture every Minnesota license plate. Well, let me give you an example in just a moment where that might almost happen. And only 17% of police departments have them at the moment. That's simply a matter of grant seeking. So these will be everywhere. They will be in use widely. And in fact, probably over a 90-day period, 90% of all Minnesota drivers will have their driver's licenses in the data bank at any given time. Now, I'm 69. I was a military officer. I had a secret clearance. I'm one of those people who clears the NICS check in less than a second. I worked very hard over those 69 years to stay out of police departments' records. I don't want to be in them. You know, if I'm driving down the road, obeying the speed limit, stopping at stop signs, I really don't wish to have myself photos taken of my car, of my license plate, to be run through data banks. Save those efforts for the people you actually have reasonable suspicion about. But let's talk about mission creep, which is something that can easily happen. This is February. In this part of the year, there are lots of gun shows that take place in Minnesota. There's nothing in this bill that prevents a police agency from parking across from the parking lot at River Center or the Convention Center in Minneapolis or the center in Rochester or the big convention center in Duluth and photographing every car. And you got 90 days to keep it. Well, there will be 13 or 14 shows in that 90-day period, and lo and behold, you have thousands and thousands of license plate pictures of people who probably are interested in exercising their constitutional right to own firearms, who are interested in exercising their constitutional right to get together for free assembly, and who are interested in exercising their constitutional right to talk to each other about politics, about mechanics, about ballistics, about whatever legal subject they choose to talk about. And lo and behold, you have derived data. Now, the bill talks about getting rid of the little photographs that are taken. But what about all the data that's derived from that? That can be kept forever. That can be a secret. That will give you a good list of who the gun owners in Minnesota are. We don't think that's a good idea. We think that, yes, if you build it, they will use it. Principle applies here. Furthermore, data gets shared. I noticed there's language in some of these bills. I believe there's language in the amendment that is going to be offered by Representative Cornish that talks about if you share it with other agencies, they must agree, they must be willing to follow the same standards. Well, I've dealt with federal agencies. If you give it to them, they will keep it. They will never give it back. They will tell you, we don't care what Minnesota statutes say, and the only way to keep them from getting it is to not retain it. Not retention also easily deals with the problem of derived lists. There won't be any. It deals with the problem of going to 5 gun shows, getting the names of all the people who go to gun shows, one of whom would be me, and making up a nice list of who in Minnesota are the gun owners. There are ways of solving this problem. Zero retention is by far the easiest, but you could provide for a private cause of action by any person aggrieved by a violation, if you put any restrictions at all on this data. And if you add in attorney's fees, must be paid, there will be a few lawsuits. But I can assure the police that, if you're not doing anything wrong, you won't be sued and you won't have to pay any of those fees. And the last thing about this data is we're completely in favor of using hit data. What we're not in favor is of stalking millions of us as we go around the cities on our daily business on the chance that there might be a needle in that haystack. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any questions, member questions for the testifier? Professor, thank you. Please stick around in case anything comes up after Representative Cornish presents this bill. Thank you so much for your testimony.
I will have to leave at 11, but I assume you'll be over by then.
Oh, we'll be done by then. Absolutely. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Feist. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the tape.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Benjamin Feist. I'm the Legislative Director for the ACLU of Minnesota. I'll keep my comments brief today. As this debate goes on, a lot of my thoughts have already been expressed by other testifiers. And I'll also speak generally about the concept rather than one bill or the other. We do support the use of this technology for the hits. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like other testifiers have said, where we pull this into question is on the issue of retention and other privacy protections that could be in place if we are going to have retention. In some of the testimony you'll hear from law enforcement, and in fact you've heard in previous testimony, they'll make some comments about how this technology is used and what it does. And we have some differences of opinion. Perhaps they're more about terminology than anything, but I think it's worth pointing out. First off, ALPRs do much more than automate what police officers have always done in running license plates manually. Before this technology, the government did not have a digital database of the historical location of every vehicle that passed by each of its ALPR cameras. And this is, I think, an important distinction. It's really the technology that has advanced to a level that we can have this huge surveillance dragnet that was impossible in the past. And that's precisely why we take such a position on this issue. Some of the law enforcement assertions are going to be that ALPRs are not tracking devices. We actually believe that they are, because the data that's collected and retained can recreate an individual's movements. It might be a step removed from putting an actual GPS device on a vehicle and tracking it around for an extended period of time, which under Supreme Court precedent would require a warrant, but it's only one step removed. As soon as this technology becomes cheap enough, we imagine, because it's so useful, we'll see this on every squad car and potentially on every corner. And this technology can be used to track the movements of people who attend protests, political events, or attend a particular place of worship, or visit a particular doctor. So the information that is maintained on innocent people can be very sensitive. We believe that it's a core principle in our society that the government does not invade people's privacy and collect information about our activities just in case they were to do something wrong in the future. For that reason, we do support zero retention on innocent Minnesotans. But if the legislature decides to allow for retention of non-hit data, we believe that the retention period should be stated in days or weeks, not months, and that 90 days is simply too long. In addition, if there is retention, there should also be a requirement that law enforcement obtain a court order of some sort in order to view the sensitive information that's collected on these innocent people. This approach would still allow law enforcement to use the data for all of the investigations that they will be talking about today. And as judges could quickly issue orders for access in those cases while providing an important oversight function that is otherwise missing under the bills as currently presented. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members? Seeing none, I'll just wrap up with a closing comment or two on my bill, and then we'll let Representative Cornish come forward. Again, as I stated in the beginning, there are basically three philosophies that you can take on mass surveillance technology. Either you think that it shouldn't be used at all on innocent citizens or those not suspected of crimes without cause. Number two, there is some utility to this type of surveillance to help catch the bad guys that are known to have committed a crime. Or three, you think the government should collect and keep all data indiscriminately on innocent people without cause, just in case they might catch somebody in the future or solve a crime in the future. Basically, do you think that you have a presumption that your daily activities and movements are private or public? That's the question you have to ask yourselves. Representative Cornish. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If somebody could move my bill for me.
I would be happy to move your bill, House File 222, before the committee to be laid over.
Madam Chair, would it be okay if I give an opening statement and then introduce my DE1 to get it in the shape that I want it in?
You bet.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Chair and members, after listening to the preceding testimony, all I can say is wow, and I don't mean that in a condescending or an insulting way, but how would I ever address and I won't call it, insult you with the word paranoia, but how would I ever address the far-reaching high degree of suspicion you have of government or technology in a short time? In other words, some of you would address a frightening, or you're frightened of technology, but yet I hope you realize how technology has advanced in law enforcement, how that's probably the major reason since 9/11 that we haven't had any major attacks like that. It's probably the reason that we're safe in our homes and our communities every day because of technology. Not only your cell phones and your laptops, but for law enforcement, one of my pieces that I've got here is a letter from the FBI telling how important LPR data is used. If in the end game, if you end up with zero retention, you basically kill an innovative and highly effective tool for law enforcement. You render it useless by zero retention, even though that's the result of the commission that advised you on this. So all law enforcement is asking for in this bill is a meager compromise, anything above zero, a starting point somewhere, rather than just say no to law enforcement in this highly useful. In the previous testimony, I worked with Mr. Gemberling for years. I was in the union when I would ask him and his staff for opinions. I believe in openness and transparency. I support that unit. And I'm a little bit disappointed with GOCRA, the Gun Owners Civil Rights Alliance, kind of hinting that this would be used against gun owners, and their author of this bill being one of the prime movers of gun owners' bills here that would protect gun owners, to think that I would forward a bill that would do anything. And how do you address questions like, we're going to use this against gun owners and track us, and then I say, no, we're not, and they say, yes, you are. I mean, how do you address a question like that, a high degree of suspicion? How do you address hints of racism or being against the unemployed or the low-income people? How do you, you say, yes, you are, and you say, no, you aren't. So what we've done in the bill and what we've done by this DE1 amendment basically puts protections into this bill. It makes a high degree of effort you have to go through in accountability, audits, the access to the information. Naturally, we don't want to have search warrants and subpoenas to have to get in there, but we would like a case number and a listing of what you're working on and why you want the reasonable suspicion that something is going on before you access the information. So in the end, after the bill is heard, what I would ask you in your consideration while it's being held over is not just to say no to law enforcement and say you're done. Help us come up to a compromise. Get what you want out of us in accountability and audits and a written policy, protections. I mean, there's so many databases floating around. If we think databases are subject to abuse, of course they are. The DVS system right now, all of your licenses are in a database, all of your license plates for your cars, your titles, everything is in a database already. And we respect that database. We want to protect it. We also want to use this for a very effective law enforcement tool. And Mr. Neumeister said only 25,000 hits. Are you kidding me? Only 25,000? That's a major amount of hits. That's fighting crime. It shouldn't be dismissed as only 25,000 hits out of all of those collections that we made. So I would really appreciate it if you would keep an open mind while we have this held over and this work to a resolution where we can come to a compromise. With that, if somebody could move the DE1 amendment for me, that would be great.
Representative Johnson would like to move the DE1 amendment.
Okay, so there you have the bill in front of you. What I've talked about before is the logs that we're required to have in this bill, the degree of accountability for the access, the written policy, the 90 days retention. I think we've tried to put some things here. I mentioned some of this came from the Senate hearing and trying to match up. And so admittedly, we're at 0 and 90, and we'd just like to find some compromise in between. Now, if there's any questions or want to hear from my testifiers, that'd be great.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Cornish, in the event that the sides can't come together and come to some compromise on a bill this legislative session, what happens to the data?
Representative Cornish.
Well, that depends. It either come all public or you affix the private classification temporary to it. But if there's no agreement and all you can do is put the private classification, it really doesn't protect it any more than the DVS system is protected now. Plus, the retention rate is forever, and there's no audits, there's no accountability. I think it's a lose-lose situation to come up with no bill. All you've got then is say, okay, we'll extend it for 2 more years, the private classification. But that's not a total protection, and that doesn't answer your questions about audits and logs and access. So I think that we should come to some type of compromise.
Thank you. And just for the record, if nothing is done this legislative session, the time will run out on the data being classified as private, and it will all become public. Before we continue with Representative Cornish, I believe Representative Johnson had an amendment, and I want to get to that quickly and discuss that. And so, Representative Johnson, would you like to move your amendment?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move the A1 amendment.
Go ahead and explain it, please, Representative Johnson.
This amendment deals with data sharing. Had a lot of people talking, even testimony in the last bill about how the data that, especially the federal governments, they keep forever. And on this amendment, this requires that any federal, state, or local department that wishes to access the data from any of the LPR readers throughout the state, and in talking to different departments that have them, the data is not shared from one department to another department. It's just data is kept in the department at this time. But in order to obtain the data, they would have to have a subpoena, and that the subpoena would have to the data would have to relate to a specific crime or criminal investigation.
Thank you. Representative Cornish, do you have a response to the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair, members, we would naturally oppose this amendment for the reasons of we've already got protections and a high degree of accessibility in there, and this talks about a subpoena. And if currently we want to share this, we already have to give a case number and a written explanation why we want the information. This would raise the bar where it would really be problematic for law enforcement. So,
other discussion from committee members? Representative Lesh.
Representative Cornish, why would it be problematic for law enforcement?
Representative Cornish.
You go ahead. You want to turn over my testifier, Representative Lesh?
Sure. Go ahead and introduce yourself on the tape, please.
Sure. Madam Chair, my name is Jeff Potts. I'm the police chief in Bloomington. And in response to the question from Representative Lesh, why it would become problematic is, well, there's a couple things there in terms of sharing. The bill that is House File 222 does already require to access a database, the accessor has to have some reasonable suspicion that a crime has, that the data that we're going to look for is connected to a crime. And the system requires that information to be entered into it in a narrative format, the case number. So when we want, say we were to get a call from another agency, we're going to transfer that same responsibility to them. They would have to provide us with that information and a case number, and then we could access the database and find out if there were any reads in the database. That, I think the requirement for a subpoena for that, as was mentioned, is problematic when they're then going to have to go get a subpoena from someone for us to then access our own data. And I'm not even sure how that would work. I'm not aware of that requirement in another process or for any other data. I can provide an example. The auditing tool and requirement that's in House File 222, in a sense, does the same thing, because the information that you would have to require for that query to happen is going to be listed in the system. So when audited, you're going to have to show why why we access the database. That is, what agency wanted the information and for what reason did they want the information. That's the checks and balances that already exist within this bill. So requiring an external subpoena to go check our own database is a bit onerous. I'm not sure how we would even handle a process like that. I guess Chief Schnell has an example. Maybe you can
Please introduce
expand on
yourself for the tape. Welcome to the committee.
Madam Chair, Paul Schnell, Police Chief for the City of Maplewood. To Representative Lush's question, I think, provide a brief example. On October 25th of last year, we had a homicide in the City of Maplewood. It was on in the area of Rice Street and Larpenteur. If you know that area, this was on the Maplewood side. On the other side, the west side of Larpenteur, is the City of Roseville, and on the south side of Larpenteur is the City of St. Paul. In order to kind of, relative to the language of the amendment, it would require us to actually obtain a subpoena when we're trying to actively engage in an investigation of the suspect vehicle that was involved in that homicide. And it seems that it would be overly onerous and really outside the provisions that the law currently allows for information to be shared freely between law enforcement agencies for a legitimate public purpose.
Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Chief Potts, your answer that, well, the system already provides for this, and it's our own data, to me that's not a good enough answer. I've been waiting for, I think, a good answer on this specific question for 3 years now, personally. Now, we make laws up here. We don't write software code. So whatever your system requires, that's up to you. You could get another database or software system 5 years from now, and it would still have to fall under the parameters of whatever law we make here today or in the future. So the answer that, well, don't worry about it, we got this taken care of, you don't have to put that into law, to me that's not a good enough answer. Second, the fact that this is your data, it's not. It's not your data. This is data that you're collecting on individuals, on innocent people that are traveling around. There are constitutional questions as to whether you should even be collecting that data in the first place. And I think that those answers are probably going to be resolved in future court action, as been hinted at by the circuit courts as well as the Supreme Court, which is we haven't gotten to that level yet and haven't had a test case. If we were to resolve a good answer to this, I would be seriously interested in engaging in what Representative Cornish had stated as a compromise. But I'm not hearing, I don't hear real movement on that. And then, Chief Schnell, I can't imagine a judge in Ramsey County that wouldn't rapidly sign off on a warrant in the case of a homicide or any kind of probable cause. I would think that that would happen pretty quickly. And the problem I have with your characterization is that it dismisses the tens of millions of images of innocent people, completely innocent people, in order to justify this one instance, which admittedly is probably a worthy instance, and I think any judge would admit that it's a worthy instance to sign off on as well. But I feel like from the perspective of law enforcement that that gets rapidly dismissed because of the importance of what you're working on. And I understand that. If I was standing there in your uniform doing your job, I would think the exact same way. But I'm just saying there's this whole other body of stuff that we're dealing with here. So if we can get through this particular piece for me, it gives me some good faith to have that discussion with Representative Cornish that he was talking about.
Madam Chair.
Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Representative Lesh, you are a strong proponent of 0 days. Does requiring a search warrant move you off of 0 days, or is it just one more hoop for you to interfere in the ability for them to keep it for more than, or to have it to even search, when you say that it would help move you for discussion?
Representative Lesh.
Madam Chair and Representative Hillstrom, I've stated multiple times in past sessions that, yes, requirement of not even necessarily a search warrant, but something beyond straight up independent and sole control by a department would absolutely move me off 0 days. I've stated it before. I'll say it again.
Representative Cornish.
Well, Representative Lesh, I don't think the chief was giving you a flippant answer. He just meant that we've placed a bill in front of you that we think have a high degree of accountability and have a case number and describe it like Mankato PD and Blue Earth County work right next to each other. And for Mankato PD to go up and ask Blue Earth County, who they work with every day, to access a system, they have to run to a judge every time they want to look for a plate number. It just seems a little onerous when we already make them present a case number and a case and link it to a crime. It just, you want us to go a little bit further than we want to. That's all in the system. There are going to be other places like that, I suppose. We've given you what we'd like to see here with what we figure is a good degree of accountability.
Thank you. Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know we're in an informational hearing, and now we're taking some actions. But first, this amendment wasn't posted. It's still not online, as far as my understanding is what I'm being told. And then secondly, I'd like to, if the author of the amendment would yield to a question.
You will yield.
Representative Johnson, so what I'm worried about when I look at your amendment, and I think, I mean, we've had discussions about this. We know, I mean, I'm still working, you're retired. I don't want to be in a position in the future either. I want my privacy protected and work very hard for that. But one of the things that's not addressed in your amendment is exigency. And that is very concerning to me when I look at, if I am working on a case, whether it's a suicidal child, whether it's various kidnapping, and I know we go to great extremes, but like 25,000 hits is a big deal. It's a lot of numbers. And if I need to call Chief Potts and I need to call Chief Schnell because I know that that person has connections in those two communities, and I need to find him, I need to find that kid. A warrant is going to take a minimum of 90 minutes if you're lucky. A subpoena, if I can get the county attorney to answer the pager within half an hour and then get it over to them and then have them check their records. So that's the biggest piece to me that doesn't afford us the opportunity for me to support this particular amendment as well too. I mean, that is I mean, if we're working a regular case, I think we could have this discussion, but this isn't doing it for me.
Okay. Representative Schoen, I believe the intent of the author was to have this just be heard and then withdrawn, but he can clarify that. That's why it wasn't posted. But go ahead, Representative Johnson.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Representative Schoen, yes, I brought this amendment forward to have discussion because issues that we do need to talk about, and I did plan to withdraw it. As far as for Representative Lesh, there's a reason I didn't put a search warrant in there, and I went with a subpoena. Because with a search warrant, you need probable cause, and there's no way we'd ever get probable cause if the data would be in the database. So a search warrant isn't even possible to obtain the information. And I went with a subpoena because it gives some accountability. You have to have justification. And it's not for the locals to look at it, stopping the local department who owns the data from looking at it. It's from having Duluth PD looking at the data in Bloomington PD without justification. If there's exigent circumstances, if you put out a bolo, be on the lookout for with a vehicle, if you've read the policies and procedures I've read a number of them of the departments that have the LPRs. And that information can be, if you go through and put out a request or information through the database through the state now, that information, those license plate vehicles you have, can be manually entered in at the screen, at the terminal, in the cars, and it'll show up if there is a hit. So that takes care of that aspect of it. But I just brought this up for discussion.
Representative Johnson, would you like to withdraw the amendment?
Yes, I would like to withdraw the amendment.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Representative Schoen.
I have to address this point. Just on that, though, Representative Johnson, when we're putting stuff into state statute, that's how policy is formulated. So the policy isn't going to be helpful. It's going to have to be changed. And so the point is that then we're going to be able to look back and go, yes, they were here 30 minutes ago. So they wouldn't be able to, without the subpoena, in that, that short amount of time. So thank you for bringing attention to this. But as you know, and I know you know, we have to be extremely careful with how we word that.
Chief Potts, I'm just curious, since we're on the discussion of the information sharing, how readily does law enforcement share information if, let's say, the feds come and they want to tap into the database that you have, or they want specific information? What is your policy on turning over data to the feds?
Madam Chair, that's a great question. I think it may help solve some concern on this information or data sharing issue in a larger sense. The agency, whether it be the FBI or Cottage Grove Police Department, Maplewood Police Department, if they had a case that they were working on and they, knowing that we deploy license plate readers, wanted for a query of that data to happen, they need to explain their case in give our department some sense that we are comfortable that they have articulated a set of facts, that they're investigating a crime for which searching the database for a license plate, there's reason for us to believe that that crime actually occurred, and then us sharing our data might help them solve that case. That is the essence of the reasonable suspicion clause in House File 222. That doesn't currently exist. That is above and beyond where this has been in the past. So I just want to clarify with regard to, I think there was an example of gun shows where license plates could be read and we could create a database. That would currently violate the law. Cannot be done. So when an agency calls us, case specific, we can, as long as we are told about the case that they're investigating, we have reason to believe, articulable suspicion that that is in fact the case that they're investigating, and they have a reason to think that our data might be valuable to that case, we'll run a query, and then we can then tell them if there are any reads in our license plate database.
And is that a written policy?
Yes.
Okay, could you just get that to the members, please?
I think, sure. I'll work on after the...
Yeah, I'm not asking for you to get it to us right now, but just to email that to us so that we could have a look at what that current policy is. Have you ever denied the federal government, if they've asked for information, have you ever denied them access?
Madam Chair, I am not aware of a case where they've called us and requested specific data that was denied. I'm not saying that that hasn't happened. I'm just not aware of a case where we've denied a request to share data from the federal, from any agency.
And I would ask, too, and maybe this is just a rhetorical question, but if you're not setting up any sort of database, but you're at the scene of these gun shows, as I believe the ACLU has found, and I don't know if it was here in Minnesota or elsewhere, why are you there scanning license plates at a gun show and doing it not just once, but several different locations? So that, why be there if there isn't some utility in collecting that data? Representative Lesh has a question.
Thank you. Chief Potts or Chief Schnell, can you assure the committee that the license plate readers that you employ are not disproportionately tracking more people of color than they are others?
Whichever one of you want to take a shot at it.
Madam Chair, Representative Lesh, we, as you pointed out, rightly pointed out, they're scanning license plates wherever they travel. We do not have any fixed, in our case, we don't have any fixed location LPRs. They are deployed throughout the city on the squad cars. Obviously, one of the things that happens in law enforcement is that we resource to need. In other words, we put our resources where the need is the greatest. Sometimes, as was pointed out, that can result in more disadvantaged areas having a higher presence of squad cars. That is a reality of policing, whether there's an LPR or not. But purposefully or intentionally, is there any type of effort to surveil or look at or focus on those areas more heavily because of the differences that exist in that particular area? No. It is based upon the need, and that is the way policing resources are in fact deployed.
Representative Lesh?
Well, Madam Chair, and thank you for that answer, Chief Schnell, but I didn't ask if it was purposeful. I would be shocked if there was any law enforcement official in this state, at least, I don't know about other states, but that would do that on purpose. But as you stated, these machines are objective. But I think what I said before, too, in response to Mr. Neumeister's point, is that the proper legal analysis is one of disparate impact, and it ignores intent. The constitutional analysis ignores whether you intended to do this or not. And if, in fact, there is a higher percentage of persons of color similarly situated that are being tracked, persons of color are a protected class constitutionally in this country, and if the data bears out that these folks are being tracked at a higher rate than white folks in the same city, we have ourselves, I think, a major problem. So, you know, I don't know what the solution is to that, but that's going to be an ongoing issue for us in this committee, I think. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Lesh. Do your testifiers have further comments on the bills, or I'm not sure what they came prepared to do. Representative Cornish.
Madam Chair, I guess I would just end with, just if the testifier could be careful of the comments, like one of them said that everybody is, even innocent people are assumed to be guilty. Law enforcement never assumes anybody to be guilty, and obvious by looking at the statistics in the reader's system, most of them aren't guilty. And so I just a little sensitive to comments like that. We surely don't think everybody's guilty, and most of the people are innocent.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move to testifiers then. Do we have Drew Evans?
That'd be the Department of Public Safety, DCA.
Go ahead and introduce yourself for the tape, please.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Drew Evans. I'm the Assistant Superintendent at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I'll be very brief for the Department of Public Safety, as you've heard a lot of testimony already today. I would say that the Department of Public Safety, along with the chiefs that have testified today, definitely see the value, investigative value and retention of this data to be utilized both for the purposes the chiefs have outlined and then in criminal investigations as we follow up on cases as you've described in front of this committee. In addition, the only other item we have to share as a concern in this particular bill is the one provision that is listed that would in relation to the security information declarations. Current state statute under the Minnesota Data Practices Act places the determination of security information with the responsible authority, with the local entity that controls that data. This bill, as it was presented in the Senate and by Representative Cornish, would place that responsibility on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension at the request of the local law enforcement agency, and we would ask for members to consider that remains consistent with the current Minnesota Data Practices Act, that they are the ones making that determination in regards to our publishing of the locations and recording the agencies that have this.
You have questions for the testifier? Seeing none, Representative Neumeister, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Neumeister has had indicated earlier he wanted to respond to the...
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Rich Neumeister. Basically, it's a three-legged stool, the LPR issue. Database, where all the folks are in, and the license plate numbers, the cameras, and then the hot list, watch list. My comments are going to be very specific to the delete everything bill. I'm going to make some suggestions for added language, take some things out, whatever. On lines, if you look at the delete everything amendment, on lines 1-6, after means, take out lines 1.6, 1.7, all the way through line .19 in investigative purposes, and then add the chair's committee definition. I talked about that before. It's very clear. And also because what are the existing law enforcement databases? What is the investigative purpose? I think that with adopting the amendment that's in the chairman's bill, chairperson's bill, it's very specifically, and it's neutral, and it encompasses how the technology will change. one of the other things about that I would like to suggest on lines 113 through 115, what's very important, and this is one of the amendments I worked on with Senator Latz on, and now it's come over here, is to make sure that the data is public. That is now currently public, again, for that accountability and transparency. But it's also important, as the HIT data is collected, it needs to be clear that it follows the traditional 1382 route, that when the investigation is over, that data is public. So we, the public, can see how the license plate data was being used to get someone with a crime. On lines 121 through 2.7, I will not address at this point. On lines 2.8, 2.9, on 2.9, after including, I would suggest put, but not limited to. That's very clear that there will be, rather than prescribe and just say, this kind of information is public in the log, but because there could be some other kinds of public data, but they may not release it to you because they'll say, well, 1 through 4 says that. Now, in my data request to Chief Schnell and Maplewood on this kind of data, there was just a little bit of a different kind of opinion about that. And I think it's important to make sure that if it's public, and if it's in the log or not, just give it. So, but not limited to, I think is important to add. On lines 216, now, if you remember in my packet, I shared with you all the kinds of hits I was able to get, and it was very specific. Stolen car, scofflaws, like in Minneapolis, whatever. Well, this category is not included in that, or those other categories are not included. So on line 216, after license, add or similar category. On lines 2.17, for a reader at a stationary or fixed location. Stationary could be parked and where it goes all over. One of the concerns, again, about people want to know where you're collecting all this information. And then on lines 218, after collected data and is installed and used. That is very similar to the chairman's language. Now, if you go to 223, the triennial, I think the audit is worthless after 3 years. I would suggest annual or more or less, and add on lines 2.24, after classified, how the data are being used. How is it being integrated into other databases? How is it being used to do certain kinds of things? This is what the legislative auditor found out when the DVS, when that audit was done. And there are other similar situations historically within BCA. Let us continue on down on lines 231. Who is defined as the law enforcement agency? As Chief Potts and as I've heard in previous testimony in the other body and here, law enforcement agency, does it include the Federal Bureau of Investigation? Does it include Homeland Security? Does it include any other agencies that may be asking for that information? Now, I do not support the language on 2.34 only on a reasonable suspicion. In my looking at the statutes, reasonable suspicion is usually for a search or to do something of action or whatever. I see it kind of hard in a searchable, wanting to share information. And so I would delete that only on a reasonable suspicion, and I would do the following. On 2.32, after automated plate reader, put on a case-by-case basis. And then on line 2.34, where it says data are pertinent, put, after 2, put an active criminal investigation. Because you go back to the the definition of what active criminal investigation is. Data collected by a law enforcement agency in order to prepare a case against a person, whether known or unknown. Commission of a crime, we have a definition. One is able to see those kinds of things.
Mr. Neumeister, if you could speed it along, that'd be great.
Okay. The other aspects, Madam Chair, that I think that's very important for the bill, whatever, is to put back in the inventory of surveillance that was taken out and was in the original bill. That's a very important one to get an idea what's happening. The second item is that there's been the issue about private companies getting access to this kind of information, so I would like to see some language that says shall not sell or trade. One of the other things that I've seen in all the data I've gotten, it's very hard to find out how LPRs are being used. So I'd like to see any stop or action on a vehicle based on hit matched with the data must be documented. Also, there be a prohibition of using LPRs on First Amendment activities without authorization by the chief person of law enforcement agency. And also, Madam Chair, that as what has happened across the country, not in Minnesota, I don't know, but there's centralization of all this data and then being shared up to the feds. So I'd like to see a prohibition on any centralization at the BCA, and it can only be done with statutory result by the legislature, and also some language addressing the issue of the federal sharing. So, Madam Chair, for the record, I want to thank you very much for at least getting this on the record, so at least some of the suggestions I can be made, if there, Madam Chair, as some of members have indicated, if there is a compromise on retention, it's important to have very strong accountability, because this is going to be the model as technology starts to go forward with some of the other things that we know is coming.
Thank you, Mr. Neumeister. Representative Schoen, did you have a question? No? Oh, okay. Are there members of the audience that would like to come forth and testify on this bill? Please come forward.
I have to go on a prison tour shortly, Madam Chair. Are we going to be done at 10, you think?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if you'll indulge me, I don't want to testify on the bill. I want to make an announcement.
Okay, Mr. Gimberling, go ahead and introduce yourself.
One of the things that MNCOGI does is we annually award the John R. Finnegan Freedom of Information Award based on criteria essentially for promoting openness in government. And I just want to announce that the award winner this year is former Representative Mary Liz Holberg. And she'll receive the award at March 16th, which is Freedom of Information Day, noon at the Minneapolis Public Library.
Great, thank you for that.
I was her nominator, and it gave me great pride to be able to do so.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. An award duly deserving. Representative Cornish, any closing comments?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members, I think we'll close it up with that and just say that all the good things that everybody wants to put into this bill, which currently aren't in statute, will be lost if it's zero retention, because I'm not going to go there. It kills the bill. So I would just ask you to please keep an open mind, and our collective thoughts, I think we can put enough protections into this policy that will benefit the protection of the public and the endeavors of law enforcement to catch the bad guys. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Cornish. Any questions, Representative Johnson?
Madam Chair, Representative Cornish, I want to thank you for bringing this forward. What we learned today here is, well, first of all, I have a lot of respect for both sides of this issue. I understand the need for protecting the data and protecting everybody's privacy, but I also understand the needs and the goals of law enforcement is to put the bad guys behind bars. And it's a wonderful tool to be able to do that. This issue is a conflict between two of our constitutional duties: protecting the privacy of the individuals while also protecting them. And that's what makes this particular issue very difficult for us and for everybody involved. As far as the data that the LPR does access, it only accesses the data that's downloaded into it daily, the hits, the warrants, the stolen vehicles. It does not run your driver's license every time it takes a picture of your license plate. It does not do that. It only looks at the, compares that license number with the data in the instrument itself. If you don't have a warrant, if your vehicle's not stolen, there's no hit. It doesn't run it. Now, looking at the policies that I've had my opportunity to read, just because there's a hit indication does not give probable cause or reasonable suspicion to stop a vehicle. That information has to be verified by actually running that information through the DVS system and the NCIC for warrants and stolen vehicles. And if it's a warrant, then the officer has to verify that if it's a male that has the warrant, this is actually a male driving it, and is reasonable match to the description on the warrant before he can actually pull the vehicle over. So it's, in a lot of times they've had responses, did the LPR make the cause for the stop? No, it was just one of many indicators for the stop or for the contact to do that arrest or recover that stolen vehicle. Now, there's also talk about being as tracking devices. Yes, could this be used as a tracking device? Absolutely. But it goes by the number of LPRs that are in a community. The Supreme Court has ruled that we have to have a search warrant to put a GPS tracking device on the vehicle. And I also believe that in order to set it up so you're tracking a vehicle or manually enter a vehicle in investigation for seeing where a vehicle is and monitoring where that vehicle is, you should have a search warrant for that. Be able to put that information into the LPR reader. But I also believe that this is a wonderful tool for law enforcement. We want law enforcement to be proactive and to stop crime before it happens. And the only way to do that is through intelligence. And this is a way for intelligence of possible crimes, reasonable suspicions to look into things. We don't want to, law enforcement no longer wants to be the reactive. They'd like to not have to come to your house to cover that burglary. But by the way, when you call to report that burglary, you are now in the law enforcement database. Anytime you report a crime or call law enforcement, you go into a database. So whether you want to be there or not, you're going to be in a database. A lot of times, when you go up and talk to an officer to ask them a question, sometimes you're going to end up in a database just because you're contacting them. They're doing intelligence when you talk to them or when they come and talk to you just to say hello. They're trying to figure out who you are and making sure you're there for a reason. In some, not all circumstances, occasionally, depending on the situation and what's going on in the community. Or if you don't belong there and something doesn't look right, they might come and talk to you. And again, they're doing surveillance, they're doing intelligence. They're being proactive to stop a crime before it happens. And that's what we want them to do. We want them to be able to stop crime, not just prevent it, stop it completely, and not have to show up on your door when something's happened. And sometimes LPR can help do that. But we also want to make sure that it's used properly. We had Mr. Gamberling talked about the award Mary Liz is getting. I have a lot of respect for her. She's taught me quite a bit over the last 2 years. And she gave me a piece of information dealing with data. And if we are going to allow the data, one thing we have to do is we must assure that the data is reliable and the reliability of the data for the intended use. But we also must take reasonable precautions to prevent the misuse of that data. And I think that's what we really need to look at, is giving law enforcement the ability to do their job and do it well to protect us, and also make sure that the data is not misused.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is directed to you. Procedurally and then timeline-wise, where are we going from here? So this is kind of like the second time we've had an informational discussion about, maybe even third, if you really want to dig down to it. So the bills are, both of these bills are before the committee. Right now, are they being laid over today? Is that the intention?
Representative Schoen, yes, these are both being laid over, and we will be, the next time that we hear either one of these bills, we will be taking action on them.
Okay.
And we will do that soon.
Okay, you don't have it calendared yet for which date in particular, but within the next week or 2 weeks? Or
Probably the next couple weeks.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for a good discussion. Thank you, Representative Cornish, for being here and presenting your bill, and for all the testifiers. I think every time we have a hearing, every time I hear about this subject, I think I learned something that I didn't know before, so I hope that members have done the same. With that, the meeting is adjourned.